Thursday, October 18th, 2018, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning I want to talk about the Federal Reserve and how it does not work in the interest of the American people, and why you should not believe what is said in the mainstream media that the Federal Reserve's objective is to maintain low inflation and low unemployment or full employment. This is all a cover. The Federal Reserve is controlled by the private bankers, the international bankers. And Eustace Mullins exposed that back in the 50s and 60s with the research he did. His major work, of course, is the Secrets of the Federal Reserve. There's also other books that talk about the Federal Reserve, but my favorite is Eustace Mullins. Of course, there's the Creature from Jekyll Island, and there were politicians who knew the game as well, like Charles Lindbergh Sr., congressman from Minnesota. There's also Louis Mcfadden, who was a Republican representative from Pennsylvania, who tried to expose the Federal Reserve as well back in the 1930s. So this is nothing new, but the mainstream media, of course, academia, all these sectors are controlled by the bankers, so they've been able to keep this, how can I say, impression about the Fed. And why am I talking about that right now? Well, because there's a lot of talk about how Trump is attacking the Fed, that they're raising rates too quickly, that there's no inflation. And I'll prove to you that the Fed is not there really to benefit the general public. It's there to help the speculators, the bankers, make money. That's all they're there for. And it's like a pump and dump machine that has the back of the U.S. government. Whenever they lose money, the public pays for it. Whenever they make money, they keep the money. It's simple. So, and that's why I think people everywhere around the world should protect themselves from this kind of nefarious activity by keeping some of their wealth safe in precious metals. And that's why I recommend goldinvestments.co.uk. A lot of people ask me where they can buy bullion here in the UK. I recommend Gold Investments. There are others as well that I recommend, like Atkinson's Atkinson's Bullion. But I have a promo code for Gold Investments. You'll get 0.5% discount if you use Maneco 64 promo code. So before I go further into the Federal Reserve and why it's not really looking after the interest of the American public and the public around the world, because the Federal Reserve is basically the central bank for the world, as the US dollar, unfortunately, is the reserve currency of the world. For that, though, I'll look at the markets, see what they're doing right this morning. Yesterday, we continued to come off a little bit in the stock market. We came off the day before and yesterday as well. Not that much, but the rally we had a couple of days ago is fizzled out. The Dow yesterday was down about 92 points. The other markets were pretty much unchanged. This morning, precious metals, especially silver for some reason, is getting hit hard, which is probably a bad sign. It probably means that they're going to come after gold. The same people who work with the Federal Reserve, the bankers, international bankers, bullion banks, not the small community banks, wherever you may live in Germany or in the US. These people are, I don't think they're evil, these small banks, but the Wall Street, City of London, Frankfurt banks are, in my opinion. So right now, gold is 1220.85, down only $1.20. The low has been 1218.60 and the high 1224. Silver is down 10 cents or 0.75%, which is there's something going on. It has been as low as 1444 and the high is 1465. Unless silver rebounds, I could see gold going lower here. because that's the modus operandi. They go after silver if they can't get gold to go down, and then eventually gold follows. But they don't succeed all the time. The Dow right now is down 14 points, so nothing very significant. 25,690. S&P is down 2 3/4 points at 2806. Nasdaq 100 future is down 3 points at 72.75. Currencies fairly steady. Cable 131.04 or sterling down just about 10 pips, but it has been weakening of late. Euro is also had a pretty didn't have a great day yesterday as well. The dollar was firmer. It's now at 115.03 unchanged, and dollar yen 112.63 unchanged as well. So very little going on in the currencies, the fiat currencies. The dollar is fairly strong against the yuan, 693.68, up 0.1%. Oil has corrected, and it has kept going down a little bit. We are just below 70 in the WTI, 69.60, and the Brent also just below 80 at 79.50. The bond markets. Well, yesterday the 10-year yield actually spiked higher from like around 315 to 320, and that's where we are this morning, 320. Italian bond yields have been rising. We're at 357 up 2, and I think yesterday it rallied from below 350 to where we are now. And what about the Federal Reserve? Well, there's an article here on Bloomberg. Trump attacks the weak link Powell can't ignore in Fed rate plan. It says, President questions why rates are rising when inflation is low. Fed chair says inflation may not be the best signal of overheating. And he's right, because first of all, these inflation numbers, which they call CPI, are all doctored. We know the cost of living in the United States for the average person is growing a lot more than around 2%. It's more like 5 or 10%. So that in itself is a lie. And that's why you can easily see that the Fed does not really work in the interest of the American people. The Federal Reserve works in the interest of the speculators, the bankers. They maximize their profits, and whenever they get out of hand, the speculation, they rein in the liquidity and create havoc and financial crisis. But the bankers, they do great during financial crisis. Don't buy into the theatrics that Hank Paulson performed in 2008 when he apparently kneeled to Nancy Pelosi to ask for a bailout. That's just theatrics. He knew he was going to get that. And he knew that his friends on Wall Street were going to be bailed out, and they're going to end up having assets owned for pennies on the dollar, and that those assets were going to be revalued to 100 in the dollar. And that's why they've become richer and richer, and they've been doing that since 1929. People like Joe Kennedy was part of the game. He made a fortune because he was an insider with the Federal Reserve crowd. He knew when to, bail out and buy it back. And that's how they do it. And they've been doing it ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve. The big first pump and dump was, of course, 1929. Then you had 1980, so to speak, 1987. And they keep getting richer and bigger and consolidate more power. And the American people, their currency keeps getting worth less. Their standard of living decreases. The middle class keeps getting hollowed out. The productive economy keeps getting exported abroad. The debt keeps increasing. So really, if the Federal Reserve was going to be beneficial to the American people. They would serve the American public. They would serve small businesses all around the United States. They would keep the currency of the United States sound by making sure that the credit that was created was for productive, endeavors and not speculation and pumping and dumping like they've been doing for the last 100 years. So, and one thing that I can show you that proves that this thing about inflation is just rubbish, because if you look here, even if you take their phony inflation and you go back to around the mid 90s, it's averaged around 2 to 2.5%. So, so it hasn't really gone anywhere. So it means that all the moves in interest rates have been nothing to do with what their inflation is supposed to be doing. And there's an even better one here. Look at recently their CPI, what they use for inflation, has been around 2.1, but it was 2.7 back last year. Why weren't they raising rates even more last year? And that's just amazing. So you see, it doesn't really matter. So it's just a cover to, this talk about unemployment or full employment interest rates. It's just a cover to distract the public attention from the fact that what the Fed is really doing is helping Wall Street, the hedge funds, the investment banks, the international banks, the speculators. They're helping them, make a lot of money, and whenever things get, and why do they engineer financial crisis? Well, because financial crisis scares the general public, and and the general public a lot of times is naive, and they think that the Federal Reserve actually is trying to help them, and they give them even more power, like they did in '08. To bail out the Wall Street institutions, and it gets worse and worse, and that's really what it's all about. So that's why you need to read some of these books, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, Eustace Mullins. It just shows you how the bankers were involved in creating the Federal Reserve. Bankers not only from the United States, but from Europe. And the politicians as well. Nelson Aldrich, well, he was the father-in-law of one of the Rockefellers, who were Rockefellers, bankers and oilmen. So it's very, very obvious. And then you have people who have tried to expose the Federal Reserve. More recently, of course, we have Ron Paul, who's a great proponent of ending the Fed. And he exposes the Federal Reserve. He started the term "end the Fed." And then you go back, you have Charles Lindbergh, who tried to expose the Federal Reserve, congressman from Minnesota, father of Charles Lindbergh, the aviator. And then you have another guy that was very interesting. Some of you have asked me about him, and I do know about him, Louis Mcfadden. He was a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Pennsylvania. He served from 1915 to 1935, and it says here he was a banker by trade, so he knew the subject, and he was an opponent of the Federal Reserve System and was the chief sponsor of the 1927 Mcfadden Act, which limited nationally chartered banks to open branch banks within the state in which the main branch was situated. So what did I think he made a speech. Congressman Mcfadden on the Federal Reserve Corporation remarks in Congress, 1934, an astounding exposure. And I won't read the whole thing, but I'll put a link in the description. So I won't read the whole speech he made to Congress, but I will talk about one of the comments he made about Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a senator from Massachusetts. And Henry Cabot Lodge made this comment on December 17th, 1913. And that was just before, the Federal Reserve Act was approved. And this is what Henry Cabot Lodge said, and I quote, it says, "My dear Senator Weeks, throughout my public life, I have supported all measures designed to take the government out of the banking business. This bill puts the government into the banking business as never before in our history. The powers vested in the Federal Reserve Board seem to me highly dangerous, especially where there is political control of the board. I should be sorry to hold stock in a bank subject to such dominations. The bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to a vast inflation of the currency." How right was he? You know, this is like 105 years ago. Look what's happened to the United States currency. "I had hoped to support this bill," he goes on, "but I cannot vote for it because it seems to me to contain features and to rest upon principles in the highest degree menacing to our prosperity, to stability in business, and to the general welfare of the people of the United States." So very truly yours, Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a very influential senator. This is part of the speech that Louis Mcfadden gave to Congress in 1934, exposing the Federal Reserve. And nothing has changed. The currency has lost even more value, has been inflated away even more. The crises are getting worse. The only business that succeeds in the United States now are financial businesses. Other businesses have been destroyed, exported offshore. So that's the purpose of the Federal Reserve. So don't be distracted by all this, debate between Trump and the Federal Reserve. It's just a distraction. Inflation. Your currency has been destroyed as they distract you. Don't believe this inflation rate that they use. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. I wish you all a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.